From a defabricated garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to manage through flu season by looking on the bright side of projectile vomiting.
That is hard to do.
And now, the podcast host who has no shame about vomiting, because who doesn't love a fun Godzilla reenactment? Pete Dominic!
Oh, what an intro to kick off 2023. I was hoping you would come up with something about something disgusting, like projectile vomiting. Pete Coe, always coming through. Thank you very much, my friend. I was talking to him over the Taint Week break that I took, and Pete is doing well. I hope that you are doing okay here at the beginning of 2023. Yay! We made it! You did it! You know, a few people didn't, though. How about that? Always seems to be a flurry of sad losses at the end of the year. You had the Barbara Walters, the Pele, the Pope, the old Pope, not the new Pope. And one of the Pointer sisters, Anita Pointer, passed away as well. Those are four names that I saw right there in that final week of 2023, I think. But I can't do my joke about the popes anymore. It wasn't really much of a joke anyway. I just thought it was interesting that there would be two popes living together in the Vatican. I know they did that show. I think on Netflix, that movie. But I always just thought if they were walking past each other in the Vatican, if they just said, hey, Pope, and how weird that would be. Like I said, not that funny, but it'll be a lot funnier when I work on it, and I will be performing January 13th in Pennsylvania. Soul Joel's Comedy Club having me back. I hope to see you there. Montgomery, Pennsylvania, Pottstown, Pennsylvania specifically. Friday, January 13th, 8 p.m., folks. But more importantly, I will be here Monday through Friday hosting this podcast, asking questions to smart people. Help me find them. Email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. What are my goals for this year? And I am actually kind of paying attention to the year change. I'm such a hypocrite. I usually make fun of the idea of New Year's resolutions and thinking about things here on January at the beginning of a year, but I'm doing it. I'm making changes. I've got all kinds of ideas for my mind, my body, my soul, and this podcast. Very excited to have an intern that's going to be joining me in a few weeks. Lots of listeners continue to help out and contribute and find ways to promote the podcast and grow the podcast subscription base so that we can keep on doing this. And welcome to new subscribers. Several people signing up over the Taint Week, which was really nice to see. That really cheered me up, made me happy. Hello to Alec Mondello, Kent Short, Sarah Biondo, Joanne Owens, Evan Anthony, Hope James, James Marcello, B. Chapman, Kevin Comiga, and Troy Feltus, I guess, signed back up. That means sometimes people's credit cards lapse. Make sure you check on that because I lose your subscription and you might not even know that. So make sure that if your credit card does expire that you re-sign up. That happens every month. I lose people, but it's great to get new people and people resubscribing to the podcast. You can always pay a little more if you want, if you're getting a lot out of it. If I didn't give you a shout out and you'd like one, I will make a big deal out of it. Give me the material. I'll go for it. If you're not a Stand Up with Pete Dominic community member, you are missing out. You're missing out on our hangouts. You're missing out on this awesome, supportive, thoughtful, hilarious, generous, compassionate community of brilliant folks who contribute in so many ways. Join us at the hangouts on Thursday night on the Discord chat platform anytime. Reach out to me anytime, and let's get it underway, shall we? It's the first show of 2023, and yet I've only got one guest and not some huge, robust news segment, because what's interesting is how slow the news cycle has been. I mean, the main political story is who is going to be the Speaker of the House, and we should start to learn that today. The best thing that happened in the news, or at least on social media over the last week, was when young climate activist Greta Thunberg was trolled by this creep Andrew Tate, who I guess, I don't know exactly who he is, former MMA guy and all-time douche nozzle, complete asshole, calls out Greta Thunberg on Twitter, talking about how many cars he has and loves to burn fossil fuel. Greta Thunberg destroys him in the best possible way, and then the guy was himself arrested for allegedly rape and sex trafficking, human trafficking. So that was kind of the best thing, that a bad guy got his in a couple of different ways. This past Saturday, Northern California just got absolutely walloped by rain. The second wettest day in San Francisco in over 170 years, causing widespread flooding and evacuation warning. A lot of listeners and friends up there in Northern California. Hopefully you guys are okay. They had atmospheric rivers, they called them. So that was pretty crazy. I saw this. A record number of Hispanic lawmakers are going to join Congress. 14 newly elected Latino members, 5 Republicans, and 9 Democrats will be sworn in, as will George Santos. We don't know what he is because he lies about every single thing. That was a story that continued to get worse. And now we're headed into the third year and third winter of COVID, the third leading cause of death last year. I just wanted to share this from Andy Slavitt. He was the COVID response coordinator in the Biden administration, and he was on MSNBC with Chris Hayes I think at the end of last week. And Chris Hayes asked him to characterize where exactly we're at here, headed into the third year of living with this terrible virus.
Well, I think society, Chris, has decided for us that roughly 250 to 350,000 deaths a year is an acceptable level, acceptable price to pay to go about our lives about like normal. And I think there are other costs, as we know as well, particularly people who work by the hour, people who work in public, deathly afraid of getting ill because they miss income. And so, I think we are at a place that is far better than last year. But it's not one that if we would have had this conversation 2 or 3 years ago and said, hey, is this acceptable? We would have felt good about it. And then I think you can't summarize where we are today without mentioning China. They may be on the verge of 500,000 deaths or greater. And in this connected world, as we saw 3 years ago, what happens in one part of the world can affect us soon after.
All right, well, there you go. Andy Slavitt on MSNBC on COVID. Lots more to talk about, obviously, and I will continue every day here to bring on usually a couple of guests that can explain life to us, what's happening in the world, what's happening in our lives, our bodies, mentally, emotionally, physically, as well as politically, socially, philosophically. I love the idea of this community growing and us growing together along with it, asking tough questions to each other, to the smartest, best communicators I can find. And I can't do it without you. So it's great to kick off this year of stand-up. I had an awesome time. Thanks for the days off. Great time with Val and the girls skiing at Gore Mountain in the Adirondacks. We had 2 days of great weather, great skiing. I'm in a really good place as we kick off this year, but I got to keep this baby going. So please sign up for a paid subscription if you haven't already. I know I already said that, so let's get to my guest, shall we? I've learned as much from David Cay Johnston about economics, specifically taxes, as anybody else that I've ever talked to. His books, Free Lunch and Perfectly Legal, specifically, were indelible, made huge impacts on me. I learned so much from both those books about our tax system and how unfair it is and how it's rigged for the wealthiest. He has written several books, 4 bestsellers. He is a highly respected investigative journalist, won the Pulitzer Prize in 2001 for beat reporting. He's reported for a wide variety of respectable, credible news outlets. He's also a distinguished lecturer at Syracuse University. And, of course, the former editor-in-chief, now co-founder of DCReport.org. He's just stepped back from his responsibilities there. I talked to him a little bit about that and what's next. But definitely check out that, DCReport.org. Check out David on Twitter at DavidCayJ. Get all of his books, and here we go. American legend, American treasure, David Cay Johnston. Whoever it was that suggested I get him on, I got to give you a shout out on tomorrow's show if you remind me. Oh, the people wanted him. They asked for him. They demanded him. And so I got him. David Cay Johnston, American treasure. So great to have you back. Thank you for saying yes to me.
Pete, it's wonderful to be on with you again. I've always enjoyed being on with you, both SiriusXM and now with your own podcast.
Very thoughtful of you. I wanted to start here. Why should we get the president, a governor, or a mayor's taxes? Why should that be transparent?
Well, up until the 1924 tax returns that came out in 25, tax returns were public. The New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, other newspapers, they ran these long lists. Here's how much Henry Ford made and how much he paid in taxes. And it's actually a very efficient way to encourage compliance and honesty. The ancient Greeks, when they began civilization in Athens or Attica, if you're a classicist,
and I am,
faced the problem of the rich have always run the place, so should they get extra votes? Well, no. One man, one vote, and it was only men back then. But the more you made, the greater your economic gain in ancient Athens, the more you were expected to pay in taxes. And they had a very simple proto-audit system called antidosis. So you're up next, Pete, to pay for a festival because you're the next richest guy in line. And you go and say, no, government of Athens, not me. That guy Johnston's richer than I am. And I then had the opportunity to either pay for the festival or swap fortunes with you. See the value of intelligence? Do you really have that money like Donald, or are you a fraud?
Right.
And I don't see any argument for continuing tax secrecy for senators, representatives, presidents, vice presidents, Supreme Court, and other federal court judges. And frankly, I don't see what harm there would be in everybody's tax return being public, because Apple and Google and all those other data mining firms, all they have to do is look at your zip code and your address. They know about how much you make.
That's crazy to me that newspapers at one point published the tax returns?
Not the returns. They published the income and the tax paid. I can send you, after we get off, a clip from the top of the front page of the New York Times in September 1925. That's just an exemplar of this kind of reporting. You know, the Chicago Tribune would run a piece saying, Julius N. Rosenwald, founder of the Sears Roebuck chain, went to the North Side Federal Government Revenue Office today and filed his tax return showing he made $5,216,011.05 and paid a tax of da-da-da-da-da.
Wow. Just to stick on this point of why this is imperative, I think it's historian Michael Beschloss. Yeah, that's why I read this. He said, if we don't learn everything about his or her finances, a future president may turn out to have violated ethics or law or be gravely indebted to shadowy people and institutions capable of damaging our American democracy. What's the history of actual presidents? Because there's no law. You suggest reforms that the history of presidents, showing their income as much less being audited while they are president.
Well, I don't think you're old enough to remember this, Pete, but I am. Richard Nixon backdated documents to get a tax break. And because he was pardoned by Gerald Ford, nothing happened to him, but his tax lawyer went to jail. So there's no question that these were felonious crimes. His vice president, Spiro Agnew, confessed to being a tax criminal, a felon, and he resigned under a deal that didn't hit him with everything the IRS had on him. And since then, every presidential and vice presidential nominee of the major parties has released some or a significant portion of their tax returns. Dick Cheney wasn't particularly compliant about this. He didn't give us everything. But Congress can't require this. A lot of people say, well, Congress pass a law requiring the disclosure by candidates. You can't do that under the Constitution. What you can do is pass a law saying that if someone is a nominee from either party or has, for example, won 5 primaries, some objective threshold, the IRS must make their tax returns public. And they just block out your Social Security number and things like that. But they would make the returns public. And Congress absolutely has the power to do this. And I think it absolutely should. But I just think it would be better if it applied to all 3 branches of the government.
Yeah, of course. But I also think it shouldn't apply to local and state government. I mean, like my town councilman can vote to give a contract for, landscaping, for development of some sort to any number of firms, including their cousin that lives in town. It's more likely that you're going to be giving things to people you trust, family members, so you can cover that in a local or state government.
And that goes to the issue of, would we be better off if our tax information was published for everyone to see? Your property taxes are public record.
Right.
And I can tell from your property taxes what your house is worth in the eyes of the government because I just need to call them up and say, what's the total combined property tax rate in your neighborhood? If you live in my neighborhood, you pay 3.5% a year. It's a really hard burden because we just have houses in Brighton, New York, outside of Rochester. But if we had a disclosure, at least disclosure of the kind we had until 1974, in 73, late 60s, you could go to the IRS and say, did Pete Dominick, who lives at this address, file a tax return and pay his taxes? And they would tell you that simple fact. And then Congress shut that off. And, I think it's a lot more efficient to use sunlight than auditors. On the other side of the coin, by the way, about auditors, Congress, since 1994, under a deal between Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton, has given the IRS extra money to go after the working poor. And I've done pieces about divorced or abandoned mothers who the IRS says, well, we're going to disallow your 2 children. And they go to the IRS office, and they sit around and wait forever, and somebody comes, and they say, here's the report cards for my children. And here's the letter from the school district showing I live in that school district. And they go, nope, that's not proof. That doesn't prove at all. The children could be living with somebody else. And so one of them went and got a notarized statement from the super in her building and a neighbor. Nope, that's not adequate. Congress is harassing the working poor. And the fact that Democrats didn't stop it when they had the opportunity tells you that they don't care. It's not, maybe they care, but it's not worth using any political capital. On the other side of the coin, there were almost 25,000 families who made over $10 million in 2019, the most recent year we have data for. 25,000 families. Their average income was around $30 million. There were only 66 completed audits. 66.
Right.
That's ridiculous. There are only about 500 people a year, Pete, who are convicted of federal tax fraud. And overwhelmingly, they are drug traffickers, politicians who took bribes, or business people who paid bribes. There is no effort to look for tax cheating among people like Donald Trump. Right now, there's 2 billionaires who have a big case against them. It's not because auditors found them, it's because somebody on the inside turned over stuff to the IRS. When you hear about a billionaire, it's almost always a mistress, a wife, a business partner who felt that they were mistreated and they're not getting what they deserve, so they go to the IRS and they have records. That's it. They're not finding these people because they're not looking for them because they don't have the resources. And if they do find them, billionaires can spend so much money on lawyers that they just tie up IRS resources for years. So we need to fundamentally reform our tax system. My next book will stop all of this. It'll propose
I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited about that, and I hope every single policymaker will read it. I look forward to that. You write in this piece at the Daily Beast, if the IRS were given more money to hunt for rich tax cheats rather than the working poor with children who applied for the earned income tax credit, we could stop a lot of high-level tax cheating. But since the rich are also political donor class, don't expect Congress to do much until it's clear voters will throw out politicians who enable tax cheating by rich business owners. Democrats have tried to reform our campaign finance system over and over, but they've never been able to have the majorities to do it. And of course, the Supreme Court has the final say on that, unfortunately. But it's important to mention this because, as you just said, the IRS doesn't have enough resources. That's hard to believe. That's hard to believe that a federal government agency like the IRS doesn't have enough resources. Could you give me an example of what you mean by that or why that is?
Sure. Corporate auditors at the IRS, whose pay is around $150,000 a year if they're in the high pay duty posts like San Francisco and Hawaii, they find on average $20 million a year of additional taxes owed. Now, imagine you own a company with a sales force and you pay your salesman $150,000. So maybe they cost you $250,000 all in, benefits, expenses, everything else. And they're bringing in $20 million. What would you do? Well, you'd go hire more and more and more of them until they were only bringing in, say, $500,000 each. It would be profitable to do that. Not Congress, not the Republican policies since George W. Bush. They cut and cut and cut this stuff. And as a result, there's just rampant cheating going on because people know there's no checking. What they're very good at is matching up your W-2 wage statement in your 1099 retirement or miscellaneous or tax refund from the state documents, because those are all electronic. And they look at those, they look at what's on your tax return. If you forgot something, I did one year, they send you a notice and a penalty, and you have to pay interest. They catch all of that. But people like Donald Trump, they control what they tell the government. And they can, as Trump did in these 6 years, they can not just cheat, they can criminally cheat, and they're not likely to get caught.
Right. Let's get to Trump and how he criminally cheated. We've got Trump's taxes finally, that the House Ways and Means Committee, controlled by Democrats up until, well, I guess today. When did the chairman, when does it take over? Republicans take over? Yeah. They released years of former President Donald Trump's tax returns. They showed that the former president paid no or very little income tax throughout his time campaigning and in office. That's kind of the headline. We'll go into it now with you because you know all about this man and the policies that he has been able to legally, in many ways, that we just outlined, take advantage of. But basically, I mean, there's so much to talk about here. I know. So top lines here. We did learn a lot. You're saying, you also said that a lot of experts and pundits are saying we didn't really learn that much, but you disagree.
Well, people who aren't experts, a lot of people you see on TV talk about tax. They know the fundamental rules of how to run, how to pay, arrange the payment of taxes and filling out tax returns, but they don't have any deep theoretical knowledge of it. So the most important thing, I believe, in the Trump tax returns are the 26 sole proprietor businesses. They file a tax return called a Schedule C. If you're a freelancer, have a side gig, you file a Schedule C. That had zero revenue, but hundreds of thousands of dollars in expenses. Now, it's not particularly material to how Trump turned $154 million of positive income flowing into his pocket into tax returns showing $53 million of negative income. But here's why it's really critically important and shows criminality by Trump. Donald Trump's biggest year when he was younger was 1984. Trump Tower opened and his first casino opened, and he had just Amazons of greenbacks flowing into his bank accounts. He filed tax returns with the state and city of New York that showed a consulting business with no revenue, but over $600,000 of expenses. Think about that, Pete. That saved him about, including federal taxes, $250,000 or more in taxes. Auditors spotted this, at least at the state and city level. We don't know about Washington. And disallowed it. Well, Trump demanded a trial, and in each case, and he was asked to produce documents to support the expenses. Copies of checks, expenses, invoices. How about calendar entries? Evidence you traveled to meet with someone to consult with him. He had nothing, and his own lawyer shown the city tax return, which was a photocopy, not a wet signature with an ink pen. Was put under oath and testified, that's my signature, but neither I nor my firm prepared that tax return. Donald Trump forged his own tax return by putting his accountant and lawyer's signature on a document he fabricated.
Wow.
That's a crime, but he wasn't referred. But both judges held this was civil tax fraud. Well, once a single judge tells you what you're doing is illegal, if you keep doing it, that is powerful evidence to a jury of criminal intent, what the law calls mens rea. And I think it's a slam dunk for Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan District Attorney, to prosecute Trump just for those 26 examples.
Yeah, so tax avoidance is not necessarily a crime. Once you're warned, then it becomes tax evasion, which is...
Tax avoidance is never a crime. Tax evasion is a crime. And he clearly crossed the line, not only there, but in some other areas. But I think that's the easy one.
The legal, well, you say it's an easy one, but just to clear up the legal question here for a potential prosecution or prosecutor is, how do we prove intent, or as you said, mens rea? Enough with that legal kind of jargon. What is that? Latin? The point being, it's very easy to prove that someone hit another person violently or fought or shot or, but and the intent there. But it's harder to prove criminal intent with white collar crime. You've written a lot about that.
Absolutely, it is. And that's why many CEOs don't use email and they operate through two assistants. So if something goes wrong, they can always say, well, one of these people, like the old telephone game you played as a kid, going around the circle. And at the end, everybody laughs at what the final message is. In this case, though, since two judges put Trump on notice about fictitious businesses and taking losses, they've got criminal intent.
Right. So what else do we learn from these 6 years of taxes? I mean, it's crazy. This is the first time the IRS didn't audit a president, apparently, right? I mean, There's just some history here. The first time in almost 100 years that IRS didn't turn over tax returns that were demanded by Congress. I mean, that there should be a law there, too.
Well, there is a law there, Pete. There is a law. When they ended tax returns being public record, they passed this new law that gave the president and the tax writing committees of Congress the absolute right to see anybody's tax return. The law says the IRS shall, which is mandatory, shall turn them over. And the only time this ever did not happen, according to everybody I've interviewed about this at the IRS, formerly at the IRS, at other places, is with Donald Trump. It just goes to how lawless his administration was.
So much of his history and business has been about he was given a tremendous amount of money. He's lost a tremendous amount of money. He's made some money, and the ways that he's made money is we could talk about. But one of the other things that I think is just the most egregious of this man, and I watched that Roy Cohn documentary, and it seems to explain his entire ideology about not paying taxes and not paying really for anything, including a dinner at a restaurant, the bill on the way out, much less a piano tuner or a music shop in New Jersey. He bought a bunch of pianos from this guy in New Jersey for the casinos, never paid him, much less improvements, developments, the cabinet maker at an apartment building. Like, he just doesn't often pay people who do work for him. And all of that adds up to the most kind of egregious human behavior that one could conduct. There's shady businessmen, there's illegal, and then there's just not paying people who actually did work for you.
Well, remember, Donald Trump began his campaign by denouncing people who enter the country without permission, calling them rapists and murderers. Donald Trump's construction of Trump Tower depended on more than 200 illegal immigrants. He didn't pay them. They were so badly paid that they were living in the Bonwit Teller department store, which they were taking down by hand with sledgehammers. And they were hungry. And they finally took Donald's overseer to, I think it was the 9th floor, leaned him out over the edge and said, "We get paid, or guess what happens to you?" Donald then produced a cash payroll, but sitting next to the guy who handed out the money to the workers was a mob guy who you had to give part of it to. I mean, Donald even cheated novice roulette players at one of his casinos, a story I wrote, 32 years ago, I think. Atlantic City, the government would always say, casinos in New Jersey are the most highly regulated industry in the history of the world. Well, how did 12, 13, and 14-year-old children gamble at Trump casinos? How is it that they were plied with liquor, with limousines, with hotel suites? How come Trump didn't go to prison for that, or somebody didn't go to prison for that? 12-year-old, I mean, I understand, 19-year-old dresses up and looks 21. Okay, that can happen. 12-year-olds? 12? He's gotten away with this stuff all his life. Roy Cohn taught him how to evade law enforcement. And one of the keys to that is always denounce law enforcement if they come after you. They're corrupt. It's the FBI that's corrupt, not me. I'm pure as the driven snow. It's the FBI. It's amazing that millions of Americans believe that. Well, the FBI certainly isn't perfect, but good grief.
A lot of Americans also, whether they believe it and they want to copy it. They too want to have to get around the rules, and we can talk about what kind of person that is. What do we learn from these taxes that could lead to any kind of criminal prosecution from the Manhattan DA or any other jurisdiction that has the power?
Well, in addition to the 26 sole proprietorships, which I think it would take 3 days at most for a prosecutor to present all the evidence to a jury. That's how simple it is. There are clear indications that Donald fabricated losses that should have been handled in a different way. It's esoteric. It's an issue of cost of goods sold versus real estate property law. And I would be worried if they bring a kitchen sink indictment for all the tax offenses you could show by Donald Trump, that it would give the defense an opportunity to sow doubt among jurors. That's why, there's an old saying among prosecutors, you don't bring the case you should, you bring the case you know you will win.
Right.
So his charitable deductions, though, I'll give you an example. This is outside the statute of limitations now, but he bought the old Marine World in Palos Verdes, California, peninsula, Los Angeles County. He put in a golf course. He was going to develop housing. Part of this is an active earthquake zone. So he was told you can't develop these 10 acres. That means they're worthless. You can't develop them, they're worthless. He took apparently a very, very large tax deduction for those 10 acres. And that should have been disallowed, especially since he argued to the property tax assessor the whole place was only worth $10 million, and he's indicated he took a deduction for that property of over $100 million. But unfortunately, it's past the statute of limitations for criminal tax.
That's not something we learned in this 6 years, though, released.
No, that's my point. It's beyond the 6 years, and one of the things I've written about in the past. So there are lots of tax crimes and other crimes Donald has committed that he is no longer reachable on, but he's absolutely reachable on the 26 imaginary businesses for which he took losses.
I just want to ask about his general income. And I mean, how does the guy continue to make any money? I have this theory based on not a lot of data, but that so much of what he's got now, or in the past, certainly since The Apprentice, he made money, I guess, with that deal, that TV deal, but a lot of that led to his name becoming internationally famous for whatever reasons. And then he licenses out his name. So he basically just slaps his name on a thing. But that's a pretty lucrative thing for him and obviously lots of other people. And there's no crime necessarily in that at all. But his name is now bad. It's been taken off a lot of buildings in a lot of cities, obviously, including New York. My point is that with the branding going bad for all kinds of different reasons, and the Manhattan DA, I know it's separate, but he's convicted on 17 counts.
His companies were convicted.
His companies were. The question is, can he still make money with his brand being damaged? And can he still make money, for example, in New York, given this conviction?
Right. I think that his revenue from these licensing deals where he slaps his name on a building, India is one of his biggest sources of revenue for this. Those are going to dwindle over time. But Donald has a new scam to make money. He's brought in more than $250 million with these incessant emails to people, 1,000-time match. I want you to come and have lunch with me at Mar-a-Lago. No evidence that anybody ever had lunch with Donald or flew on his airplane with him or any of the things he promises. But he's taken in $250 million. You can live pretty well for a long time on $250 million. And he is 76 years old. So we're looking at maybe 20 years, 25 if he's really lucky. He's going to be around.
And if we're not.
Yeah. Donald, in the art of the deal, Donald demonstrated two things that are very little known. First of all, he showed he's a horrible businessman because the fee to write a book like that for someone like Donald at the time would have been $50,000, maybe $100,000. And the writer asked for half the royalties, and Donald said, okay. So he made millions off the book. He now donates the royalties to charity. The second is that in that book, he brags for pages about how he swindled and cheated his partners, the Holiday Inns Corporation, the motel chain. The parent company of that was his partner in building his first casino. And there's a whole story about how he set out intentionally to trick them into thinking he had made progress putting up the casino hotel when he hadn't. And he's bragging about defrauding his partners. And I was dumbfounded when I read the book and I saw all these comments about what a fascinating book, from publications all over the place. And I went, the man is bragging that he's a fraudster. How did you miss that? And, part of the reason is I don't think most people do not have a deep knowledge of criminal law or tax. I happen to, because I have had to for my work as a journalist.
Right. And you've had an amazing career as a result. So let me ask you here as we wrap up our conversation. I look forward to having many more with you, and maybe you'll have a little bit more time stepping back from your responsibilities at DC Report. And I've talked a little bit about that, read a little bit about that before I introduced you. But what's next for you? You're not retiring. You're writing more. You're going to continue. You've got a new book coming out, right? Like, what's next?
Well, I continue to teach law at Syracuse University College of Law, and I'm not a lawyer. In fact, I don't have a college degree. I went to college for 8 years, but I spent most of it in graduate school, and they won't give you any degree if you skip freshman and sophomore years. But I'll continue teaching at Syracuse. I am working on my next book I set aside 7.5 years ago because of Donald, tentatively titled The Prosperity Tax. But a whole bunch of experts have gone over my plan to have a simpler, fairer, virtually cheat-proof tax system would end tax filing and allow us to shrink the IRS way down and yet collect much more revenue at lower rates than we pay now. And every expert has gone over it. Tax accountants, tax administrators, tax lawyers, business owners all say, well, that would work. But of course, all the people who make a profit off the tax system, and lots of companies and some individuals make a profit off the tax system by deferring taxes into the future, they're going to fight tooth and nail to keep it. And I'll be writing some magazine pieces here and there. I occasionally write for the New York Daily News. There's some other publications that wanted me to write for them, and I felt I couldn't so long as I was the publisher and editor-in-chief at DC Report. Now I'm just a contributor.
Well, I'm very excited to see whatever you're doing. You'll continue along on Twitter regardless. What do you have to say about Elon Musk's takeover and all of that? I mean, I could talk to you about everything forever, but
when I was at the Los Angeles Times, I would do a front page expose, and the editorial page within a week would have a piece without naming me saying basically, oh, don't believe that, or, that's not that big a deal. So I learned a long, long time ago, I don't care about the publisher's politics. I care about the platform.
Right. I love it. Well, hopefully the platform doesn't become too corrupted. I mean, I'm not sure what you've noticed so far, but there's going to be real problems, and he's given a voice to people who are fomenting violence, and that's very troubling. But my going away from there wouldn't exactly. I hear you. Thank you so much for talking to me today. I look forward to doing it again soon. Always so grateful for so much of what I've learned from you and your books over the years, and I'm glad that you joined me. Thank you, sir.
Well, be well and have a great 2023, Pete.
All right, there he goes, David Cay Johnston. Go check out DC Report, read him at the Daily Beast, follow him on Twitter, and let him know that you heard him here on the program. I am so sorry, I forget who recommended that he join the program. I need to, someone will remind me, and I'll give you credit on tomorrow's show. I promise you that. How about it? At David Cayj on Twitter, which is apparently still a thing. All right, that's it. Tomorrow we'll be back to two guests, it looks like. I'm going to be talking to John Fugelsang, Shahad Ali, and David Rothkopf. At least that's what's on the schedule. You never know. Things come up, people cancel, we have to reschedule, but that's what I'm teasing. I like to be as relevant and up to date as possible, but like I said earlier, let me know who you'd like me to book. What kind of authors, what kind of guests would you like for me to be talking to, asking questions to? Who would you like to ask questions to? Let me know, and I look forward to hearing from you. As always, standupwithpete@gmail.com is my email address. Send your vitamin N nature pictures. Sign up for a paid subscription to the podcast. Write a review on Spotify, iTunes, and all of the things. And I will talk to you tomorrow. We're back, baby. Happy New Year. John Carroll, take us out.
Off of your butt, down off of your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense, and you stand up, stand you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.